What up, y'all? Before we get into one of the best podcasts we've ever recorded, I have a quick favor I need from you. And I know you're probably thinking, why are you wearing such cool sunglasses, dude? It's to get your attention. I hope it's working. If you're on Apple or you're on Spotify, go to YouTube and see my cool sunglasses. Anyways, there's going to be a link in the video. It's for the Golden Seller Awards. I don't even really know what it is, but I got an email and I thought we can win that for sure. So it'd be dope if you guys could go there. And then let me see if I can make a cool edit here. We'll do cast your nomination, very simple, and then category, community best podcast, and then you write us in the Side Hustle Experiment podcast, and you put John's email below that. I don't know what happens when we win. Not even really sure what the thing is, but it's Amazon related, and as you guys know, we have the best podcast, obviously. So thank you very much. Enjoy the podcast. It is very, very good. This guy's very smart. It was a cool conversation, and let's hope we win. Peace.
What is up, guys? Welcome back to the Side Hustle Experiment podcast. Today we have Dylan from Aura, the repricing software. I've known Dylan for a while now. I've met in person. I've been using Aura, I don't know, for 3 or 4 years now. So we're going to talk about Q4 pricing, how it's different. We're going to talk about AI, and then we always just geek out on productivity and other stuff. So we'll probably get into that as well. So thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, appreciate you guys having me on.
Cool. Let's just get right into it. So you want to talk about Q4, one of the best times to be an Amazon seller, sell on Amazon. Kind of how do you handle repricing differently?
Yeah.
Or should you?
Q4 is, I call it the Super Bowl for Amazon sellers, because that's what it feels like. You're going to do like 70% plus of your annual revenue in Q4 alone. So it's a huge opportunity, but I think a lot of people just ride the wave organically, right? Demand went up and I sold more things, yay. But what percentage of that opportunity did you actually claim? Was it 40%? Was it 80%? It's kind of hard to measure. But when you're talking about solving that problem in repricing, it becomes really, really crucial because you're not able to move fast enough. This is the problem too, right? It's not just that prices go up. It's how fast things change. When I was a seller doing wholesale, I somehow got a toy brand, direct brand, everything was awesome. And I under-ordered, and literally they would get checked in batches of 100. I'd refresh Seller Central, they were gone. Refresh, they'd get checked in, 30 minutes later, refresh, 100 were gone. And so like, I'm immediately calling my brand like, hey, I need pallets of this. Give me 10,000 units. Like, no, we're done, right? And so part of it was I was moving things too fast because I actually wasn't repricing. This was a problem, right? I was riding the wave of velocity, but not of profit margin. And so when you think about repricing tools, they don't just lower your price. If yours only does that, get a new one, right? Like it should also look at raising your prices, because the thing to consider here is every listing is its own mini economy. It really is. Like no listing is comparative to another. And so that presents its own complexity problem. How do you really optimize every single listing? Well, it's really hard to do. And this is why we develop Maven to kind of solve this problem, because sellers are really dealing with two different problems: complexity and speed. And you're dealing with this 24/7 every time of the year, but Q4, all these things get maximized and raised to the nth degree. So when you're thinking about repricing in Q4, you really want dynamic things. And what I mean by that is you have mins and maxes, right? Everybody knows mins and maxes. I've said for probably the past decade, min prices have everything to do with you. Max prices have nothing to do with you. So if you're setting your max prices based on things like cost, you're actually doing yourself a disservice. And if you're manually setting it, congratulations, you're either setting it too high or too low at some given time. Okay, Dylan, then what's the solution here? Well, the solution is looking at how do we dynamically set that in a way that is movable? Because what is appropriate as an upper bound of a price for a toy in Q1 is very different than that same toy in Q4. This gets really difficult, right? And how do you price? What a lot of people do with repricing, which is very common, is they react. They say, I want to target the buy box. Awesome. But is that enough? I don't think so. And I talked about this at AMZ United. The way we have historically measured success for repricing has been one of two things. My sales went up or my buy box ownership percentage went up. Okay, great. If you come to me and say, Dylan, I want you to give me those two things and no other limitations, I'm going to lower your prices by 20%. Congratulations, you got both those things, but are you happy? No. And that becomes its something that sellers need to understand at a deep level, because you have kind of two levers here. When you're talking about how you're updating your price, you're doing one of two things. You're either increasing velocity, meaning you're pricing down, or you're increasing profitability, which means you're probably going to price up. Well, those two things are opposing forces. So how do you solve that problem? Well, you can actually find the equilibrium. And so what we do is we said, okay, well, that's really hard for humans to do because it changes. It can change every few seconds in some cases. So what if we created a massive equation that could actually help us calculate in real time, what is the equilibrium here? We call that the optimal price. Why does this matter? It matters because you're trying to find that balance between sales velocity and profitability. If you're only targeting one thing, which is the buy box, well, then you're prioritizing sales velocity, not profitability. And when we're talking Q4, yes, you want to move things fast, but you don't want to run out of inventory. That's the worst thing, which is what I was talking about previously with the toy. I ran out before peak Q4. So like, think about, like, did I do well? Yeah, for sure. But could I have done 10 times better? Yes. But it's because I was moving things too fast and I didn't have something that was pricing me up as the market itself was changing. And so the world we kind of need to transition to, and what we're focused on at Aura, and this is why we like doing education and talking about it, is you have to redefine how you're measuring success. You know, why is it that people can get sales $10 above the buy box? Well, there's something there that is really important. And that's where the optimal price comes in. And what's interesting is when you look at the optimal price across the board relative to the current buy box, it's above it. Initially, that felt odd to me because I'm like, why is that? But then I thought about it from an economics perspective. What happens when the demand doesn't change, but you have a huge increase in supply? Your price goes down. That's downward pressure. So our challenge as Amazon sellers is to say, well, how do I relieve that pressure? How do I not fall into that pressure? And so for us, we said, okay, well, we're going to redefine success as you, and ideally you plus the buy box, are at the optimal price as often as possible. And what's interesting is that optimal price fluctuates. Just like I said, the upper bound price, so your max price for a toy in Q1 is very different than that same toy in Q4. So is true for the optimal price. You might be able to get $25 for a toy in Q2. Q4, that could be $32. So you need to be able to ride the wave, not of just velocity, but of profit margin as well. And so when you're going into this Q4 thinking from like, how am I really optimizing my systems here? You need to be thinking about flexibility. And this is where AI really starts to shine, because now it's not, well, I have my mins and maxes and I'm set and I'm done. Those don't work going into Q4. It's a very different scenario. And so if you have a system that can understand things are changing and react to those things on the upper side, so the higher end pricing, you're going to be okay. Because again, it's nice when you sell out all your inventory because you're like, cool, I didn't lose anything. But you did lose something. You lost opportunity. And that's kind of worse. I'd rather you have a little bit of inventory left over, right? Like that's kind of the sweet spot, right? You're never going to end perfectly optimized, but like if we can help you not run out of inventory, make the most profit and move things really fast, that's the sweet spot. So that's kind of how I want people to start thinking about, we're in Q4, we're going into this peak season. What am I changing, especially in my repricer, to ensure that I'm getting the most percentage of that opportunity, not that 40%. I want you to get a lot more from that. So that's kind of how I think about it and how I think sellers should be thinking about it.
And how's the mechanism of like the AI thing work? Because I used to use Aura back in the day. I'm like an old man, but like probably 2-3 years ago, and all repricers there, they weren't using AI. It was kind of all similar. So I'm guessing at some point you had to be like, all right, we got to figure out how to like do something different than just race to the bottom like all other repricers do as well. So like what's the mechanism there, and like what's the formula? I guess I'm sure it's complex, but as simple as you can put it to like make this option for people.
Yeah, let's clarify the problem that repricing is solving. In an ideal world, and I've already mentioned that every listing is very different than the other, right? So in an ideal world, what would repricing look like? You would have a strategy designed for every single listing that you have, and the settings would change moment by moment. Good luck. So what you don't need is more strategy types. What we need to do is take a step back and say, okay, well, the real problem here is the complexity. Nothing is cut and dry. If it was, we wouldn't exist, right? If Amazon just said,
Mhm.
here's the algorithm, easy. One, that algorithm doesn't truly exist because there's many variations of it. Some listings behave very differently than others. So there's no consistency here. So when you're trying to solve complexity in a way that you cannot perfectly define, how do you solve that problem? Well, this is, again, we take a step back and say, okay, well, what if we could build something that understood the complexity and could utilize that complexity as a competitive advantage? And so here's how we think about it at a broad way. I already mentioned how we need to redefine success. So that's where we want to go, right? Where we want to go is that optimal price as often as possible. Because again, that's finding the sweet spot, the balance between sales velocity and profitability. Now, there are times where you want to prioritize sales velocity over profitability, and the inverse is true as well. But for us, we're like, let's just find that balance first and help there. Because a lot of what sellers are struggling with is they jump into a repricing tool and there's 30 something settings and they're like, good luck. Okay, that's not helpful. I'm not a professional repricer. So like, what do we do here? Well, what if we as a software company could say, let's handle all that complexity for you to increase performance, but give you only one setting, which is how you want to set your min values. We'll take care of everything else, right? So not just making it very complicated and saying, hey, here's all that complication for you. We're saying, no, like that's our job. Okay, so we know where we want to go. We've defined that success. We also need to know what's true. And this is where that complexity starts to become more clear. So what Aura will do is it'll actually test against all your competitors. It'll study them and understand, true, you're going to match me. John's always going to reprice 2 cents below me. Doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but if I understand your behaviors, in a way, I can reverse engineer your strategy, right? And so is it true that there's an optimal strategy depending on if my competitor is matching me versus if they're not matching me? Well, yeah. And this is where game theory comes in. So we're not only game theory. Game theory makes a lot of sense in this section of it of understanding what's true. And game theory sounds so complicated. It's really not. Game theory is as simple as if you and I are taking turns in a game, it's turn-based, and I have to go first, but I don't know what you're going to do. I have two options. I can either be cooperative, meaning in the repricing world, I'm going to match you, or uncooperative, meaning I'm going to try and beat you or reprice below you. The optimal strategy is to first be cooperative. Why? Because if I'm uncooperative, that might trigger you to be uncooperative, right? So, but I don't know. So I'm going to say, you know what? I'm going to match you. And then you go and I go, great. What did you do? Well, if you're going to match me, I'm going to continue matching you. But the moment you try to fight me, AKA you become uncooperative, I will also be uncooperative. That's all game theory is, right? Your competition is either cooperating or non-cooperating, and however you want to define that. And that changes our own behavior. But where we take this a step further is we do this for every one of your competitors. This is so important. Depending on who I'm repricing against, I might need to be 8 cents below them to actually pull the buy box because that's what we saw in the data. But for another competitor on the exact same listing, I might be able to match them and rotate the buy box and be completely fine and not have to do that 8 cents below. Okay, so if I know where I want to go, what is true, I can now use this information as inputs to say, well, what behaviors, AKA what price changes do I need to make to close that gap? And that's what we're doing at a very like broad spectrum.
Yeah, so taking something very complex and like kind of making it simple for the user, but it's like complex on the back end. Because that was a question I was going to ask actually, is like when you're making these softwares in general, and repricing is definitely one of these, where's the balance between how much control you give over people and how complex it is versus like we need the most users. Like that's the goal, is to help the most amount of people. And if we make this complex, like that's not going to happen. So how can we make it as simple, but also, useful at the same time? Is you kind of, even in the past of Aura, like where do you kind of look at that type of thing? And then what's your goal with it? Of like, how do we get the most people, make it the simplest for them?
Yeah, it's something we think about a lot. When we surveyed users before we did the rebuild, and we spent 18 months rebuilding Aura from the ground up, like everything. We surveyed users and just said, what word comes to mind? We didn't give a word bank. It's completely open-ended. And most of the time the word intuitive came up. It was easy to understand and get into. That's important. You have to understand your users, right? Are your users highly technical? Like if we're supporting developers, yeah, it's gonna be as customizable as possible because that's what those people want. The average seller is not technical. And so that balance is really difficult because there's certainly a spectrum. There are users who are like, I know exactly what I want. Let me build it. Awesome. So I don't think we're going to a world where it's only AI. You know, I'm that dork and I'm like, oh, what if we could? And then it's like, okay, but realistically, you shouldn't use AI in every single case. It's going to work 80% of the time really well. But there's that other 20% where you need to build a custom strategy because it's just that exceptional. So I think at least the way we approach it is the default is as hands off and as high performant as possible for the people who are not that interested in really getting into the granular details of it. But you still have those rule-based strategies for somebody who's like, I know exactly what I want to build. Great, go do it. The issue that I have with Amazon-based software is we have feature requests, right? I want this, I want that, I want, okay, whatever. And then the software company goes, great, you got it. There was no thought process put into, well, what is the problem we're trying to solve here? Like, your job as the user is to tell me your problems and your pains. It is my job to solve that in the best possible way with my knowledge and skill set. But that doesn't occur. What occurs is I give you exactly what you asked for, but you're one individual. You don't have the perspective of tens of thousands of users. So you have software where they're like, you could do all these crazy things. Awesome. That's really overwhelming, right? There's this problem of like choice overload, right? If you give somebody too many decisions, they like neurologically get fatigued. And so I think you build it in such a way that the default is the path of least resistance while maximizing the performance, but then kind of getting out of the way for that subset of people who are like, I know exactly what I want. But the default really should be intuitive. It should be easy to use. I don't, and think about this, right? If you said, Dylan, make Aura better from a strategy perspective, I have three options. I can add a new setting, I can remove a setting, and I can change the definition of a setting. Each one of those broke the workflow, right? So if I did that, and you woke up and said, hey, we just changed this, you now have to go understand how that changes your strategy, the way it's actually behaving, because that fundamentally changed. And you have some homework to do. But a model doesn't do that. A model can say, well, what if we factored in something like age of inventory? Let's look at the data. Let's beta test this. And let's say we find that 80% of the time, if we do it this way, it works out. I can roll that out and just say, hey, by the way, we added age of inventory. Here's how we're doing this. There's nothing you need to do. Enjoy the added performance. It's very different. You know what I mean? So I think our perspective on how repricing is done has to fundamentally change. And this is something we're trying to push for, but it is a challenge. There are feature requests we get where we're like, I understand why you want that, but that's not the solution. The solution is something very different. And I think that's where innovation comes in, right? When somebody's like, oh, that felt innovative, they're probably solving the same problem. They're just solving it in a very different way because they have a different perspective.
Yep. That makes a lot of sense. Because I feel like that's always everybody's gripe on all these softwares. It's like, well, they don't do this. It's like, well, man, like you're not the only person that's using that software. And if they add stuff in like that, it's going to immediately turn people off to it. Like, cause I remember I used Aura for a long time and I tested out some other stuff and I was like, damn, this one's overwhelming. This one seems too basic. It was just like, there's so many things going on that it's like as clean and clear and concise as possible. That's like kind of what you need there. And then I guess you could always offer more features, you know, if you had some similar like that, but I mean, I don't know how complex that is with software, but do you guys do anything like that? Or is it one standard or how is it?
One standard. We've been offered to do custom software. It's just not worth it for us. Our big drive is how do we help the average seller? Right. And I've had a big problem where things like AI and repricing has been premiumly priced. So your brand new seller's like, cool, well, I can't afford that, so I don't get to compete. That's the thought process. So for us, we said, well, no, that's not how it should be. It should be accessible. Why can't a seller doing 30 grand a month compete from a technology standpoint with somebody doing 3 million a month? They should. They just have to pay differently because there's a different, amount of resources being consumed. And so what we're not trying to do is build something that is basic. Our challenge and what we've been really developing, especially with this 1.0 version, is how do we increase the performance? How do we make it more advanced, but not complicated? And I think those two things tend to go together. People go, well, look at all the bells and whistles. That does not make it more valuable or more performant. And so for us, we want to be the most modern advanced repricer that is not overwhelming to use and is honestly just enjoyable to use.
Yep. Well, John, what else you got on the repricing side? Because me, I'll probably get into this AI stuff in a minute. So you could juice him out of the Q4 stuff first.
I guess we'll go with, what do you think? So one, how often should people be repricing during Q4?
Yeah.
Or maybe you kind of touched on it before,
Mm-hmm.
what should you be doing? Like things are changing so quickly. So like
Yeah.
walk someone through it, be like, okay, this is Q4. During the year, you're normally doing this. You might want to consider doing this. Like, here's how
Mm-hmm.
you would change it up.
Yeah, the good news is if you're using Maven, there's really nothing to change. And that was built directly for
Explain
that
Maven
reason.
for
Yeah, so
everyone.
so Maven was the model, the AI model that I was talking about, right? We understand, we calculate that optimal price, we understand your competition, and then we use that information to close the gap, right? What's nice is as the market is increasing, so demand is increasing, the prices are increasing, Maven's able to recalculate that optimal price and be like, oh, actually, it should be 20% higher. That's our new target. And your max prices, it's funny, like max prices are beneficial, but they're extremely difficult, as I mentioned previously, to set manually. You either set it too high or too low. So that dynamic max will also increase and fluctuate as the market's shifting. So we wanted something that we could say, because we had a lot of sellers, going into Q4, they're like, what's my Q4 strategy? I'm like, man, like, again, ideal world, you shouldn't have to do that. It should just change with the market. And so that's what Maven's designed to do. Now, in terms of how to approach this, one thing, and it's going to sound counterintuitive, is to lower your min values. It sounds super counterintuitive. Maven's not designed to reprice down like that. Can it reprice lower? Of course, if that's where the market's at, right? But a lot of people got a bad taste in their mouth when some companies said, we have AI, and they didn't, and it just tanked everything. And even their second version did that as well. That's not what it's designed to do. So we alpha test everything internally. We do what's called dog fooding, basically using our own product. So we do enough OA to basically run some crazy, experiments. I set everything in that account to 0% ROI using Maven. Margin didn't budge. It's completely fine. What's interesting is a lot of people want to take their min ROI value from rule base and apply it to Maven. So let's say 30%. That's a good example. And then they're like, I'm not seeing as much performance increase as I expected. Well, if we go in and we change that 30 to a 15 and click save, things will take off. Because Maven sometimes can go down to grab the buy box and then pop it back up, right? It's the second order of what we're doing here. And in terms of like how frequently, how often, things of that nature, here's a good example of this. People are, for the most part, familiar with something called the yo-yo strategy, right? You pop your price up to a max for whatever period of time, however frequent, once an hour or once every 3 hours at midnight, whatever. Think about this. If you do it every hour, how do you know that that is the optimal time to do it? And are you possibly, when you pop it up, losing a sale that you could have got, but your price looked nice, right? It's high, but you didn't get a sale, but you still could have got a 30% ROI, but you're trading that sale now for a theoretical sale in 10 minutes. So things that are rigid and time bound, it's better than doing nothing, right? What Maven's doing is that same thing, but behaviorally. It's understanding when is the best time to do those things. It could be once an hour. It could be every 5 minutes, right? It could be not at all. And so this gets back to my whole concept of things need to be more dynamic. It's less about this rigid once an hour I do these things, and more is now the right time to do it. And if so, do it. And if it's not, don't do it. Your price is going up to max looks beautiful, but if it's not generating a sale, it is irrelevant, right? So, and check me on this, right? Like go to Twitter, search or repricer or repricing, and like see people getting sales above the buy box. Why above the buy box? They're going to that optimal price, but when we can actually grab a sale. And so I think that's super important to keep in mind. So it's less about like what frequency and more just like, when does it make sense? And this is what's hard as humans, because I can't tell you, here's exactly when to do it. No, if you give me a blob of data, I can kind of tell you now makes sense or now it doesn't make sense. And this is where that complexity conversation circles back. There are things that are changing so rapidly. I mean, 1 minute in the world of repricing is very different than the next.
For
I
sure.
go ahead, John. Go ahead.
I was gonna say last year, I don't think you had Maven or it wasn't rolled
No,
out yet.
it was in
And
beta. Yeah.
there was actually like a product me and someone were on, and we were getting like $55 for it. And it was only the two of us. We knew exactly where we could get it. And like the stock was extremely low. And then one
Yeah.
day he's like, we should let's try to get higher than 55. And like
Yeah.
we worked our way all the way up to I think it was 85.
Right.
And it was like, Jesus, like, and we were getting
Right.
85 consistently, same buy box share, like, so $30 more.
Right.
But like we wouldn't know because we're afraid, oh, we're gonna get a high price error or whatever. It's gonna
Sure.
screw up the listing, you're gonna lose the buy box, and then like becomes a nightmare to kind of liquidate something like that.
Yeah.
But it was just super interesting. And I guess like if Maven was around, like they'd just kind of be like testing that for us. I guess we wouldn't
Yeah.
even have to think about that. But we
And
lost
that's
a
the
ton
thing.
of we made a ton of money, but like we lost out on hundreds of sales for
Right.
another $30.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, right? Like it's finding the sweet spot because 80 may have been too high and maybe 75 was actually perfect for,
Yeah.
finding that balance between profitability and sales velocity. But, and this is my whole key thing is like all these things sellers are doing manually. I'm like, why don't we just do that for you, but do it in a way that makes more sense? Again, that behavioral based approach instead of time bound and all this manual stuff. Because you make money when you buy inventory. Let us handle the sales side, right? So we're trying to say, how do we take on more of those things, make them less manual, make them more performant in its isolated concept, like the yo-yo and all that stuff. And there are sellers getting started with repricing that have never heard of yo-yo, that have never heard of raising their prices the way we're doing it, but they're getting the benefits of it. Think about that. I want to take somebody who's like, I don't care how it works. Awesome, got you. You don't need to.
I think one thing I'm sure this makes you very bullish on this repricing stuff too is as Amazon gets like more difficult, when the
Mhm.
buying becomes more difficult, which is like just a fact it is, there's more people doing it.
Sure.
The selling becomes like way more important, right? It's like if you
Yeah.
don't, you can't just price kind of how you used to of like I'm going to find this awesome deal and I'm going to just put it whatever it's going to sell. Like likely you're going to find some awesome deal and 40 other people are going to be with you. So it's
Yeah.
like, but my question that come out of that is what's your thought on like the future of repricing there and like
Yeah.
what's the goal of this stuff of like your ideal world of repricing? Does
Mhm.
like everybody use Aura and it's just awesome, or is it like what's the whole like on the future of it and like how's it going to make it ideal so people are still profitable in general?
I think if everybody used Aura, that would be amazing.
I'll let you
um,
throw that one in there.
I'm slightly biased, obviously, but yeah, what does the future look like? I think it is handling more the ever evolving complexity. This is the thing I love about technology. If you start to get into like the concept of leverage, immediate thing that comes to mind is like capital, right? Like I'm going to buy real estate, I'm going to take out a loan, that's leverage. Sure. When you're hiring people, that's human leverage. Technology leverage is one of the most impactful types of leverages. And for me, it's always how do we build software that allows you to do dramatically more than you ever could? And how's that change? Because the fact is, Amazon is a maturing industry. It will continue to become more complicated in some way, shape, or form. But does that have to mean complications for the seller as a person, as a human? Or does that mean that software can step in and say, we can handle that complexity really well for you and abstract it away from you so you don't have to think about it? And you keep focusing on the things that you have control over, which is sourcing. But even stuff like that, I think will change. I think it will also come down to being multi-channel. And what's happening right now with Walmart, and Walmart's something we're heavily looking at and pursuing right now on the repricing front, it's mainly just price matching. It's just we'll keep the same price you have on Walmart that you have on Amazon. Yeah, it's better than not, I guess, but that's not first principles. The fact is Walmart is somewhat different in how they operate. And so would it be better to have a repricing tool that solely understands and works in the confines and limitations and the opportunities of Walmart? Yeah. So I think you're going to have a system that can not say, well, I'm doing X here, therefore I should do X here. Instead, it should say, well, what's the commonalities? Well, commonalities probably going to be your min values, that 30% ROI. Fees are going to be different, sure. But again, abstract that away from you. The max price or the optimal price on Walmart could be 20% higher than it is on Amazon. So why wouldn't you want to do that? Right. So I think what's going to happen is we're going to have multi-channel selling, and you're going to need systems in place that can really work well on each of those individual channels, but not have to jump into 3 different repricing tools. I think you're going to want to be in one and to say, cool, I need to be able to zoom out and be like, how are things going here? Because here's the important part. If you are consistently getting 20% higher sale price on Walmart and the velocity is close enough, this now affects how you order your inventory and where you ship it. Let's say you can only afford to order 100 units. Well, if you're selling multi-channel, how do you decide? Are you just saying I'm going to send 80% to Amazon because the velocity is higher? Maybe, but maybe not, right? And this is where it gets really complicated for a lot of people. And this is something we're trying to help with, is that's a data analyst problem, right? Looking at the data and saying, okay, well, let's break this down. If I go 50-50, what does that look like? How do I take that information and maximize my profit? It's a math problem is what it is. Technology can help with that. And so I think it's less just thinking about how repricing will change. I think it will continue to handle the ever evolving complexities, but I think it pairs really nicely with how is your day-to-day operations going to change? You know what I mean? Like they sound separate, but they're actually really not. They work hand in hand pretty well.
Yeah, because this whole Walmart thing, like we've had a bunch of guys on here that like have been like real big on the Walmart thing, but what people don't understand, and well, I'm sure you do understand, is that that just causes like 50 other problems, especially when it like comes to all that. So yeah, your thing is like you need to get like a central solution to these like complex problems that I don't think many people see on the horizon of it, but I think that is kind of like what's going to happen.
Yeah, and people are smart for going multi-channel. It's diversifying your risk, right? Section 3s are a thing. But if it's really not much more friction to sell on both channels, like if you're not really trading anything, right? Why not? Back in the day, got a decade ago at this point when I was a seller, I urge people, I was like, don't go to other marketplaces until you've fully maximized the opportunity on Amazon and you still have capital left over that you can't spend. Then do it. That's changed because the risk profile of being an Amazon seller has shifted a little bit too. And so I think it makes sense to do it. But listen, if you're going to do it, you might as well do it right. But to your point, it does create other problems. Like you're now selling on multiple channels. The way you do inventory management and ordering will have to change. And a lot of our tools are not designed for that because this is a relatively new thing. I mean, people have sold on Walmart for a little while and eBay and things of that nature, but not in the way they're doing it now. They're treating it as like an actual secondary channel, not just like a thing I kind of do on the side, or, I send my returns to eBay kind of a thing. And so we're going to have to build software that can understand and help sellers wade through that data. And that's a hard challenge.
Well, you mentioned previously about the AI stuff. What's the I don't want you to spill if you got anything in the works, but is there anything you see like that's going to change the game with AI? Maybe it's not ready now, but it will be in the future.
There's some stuff we're working on. We're early stage on it. I can't share too much, but I'll paint the problem. The problem is you're drowning in data and you don't even realize it. And I say that as a positive. Data is great. Data is gold. The amount of data you have access to in Seller Central is very different than the amount of data you have access to via the API. But most sellers are not developers and grabbing the raw data, right? We do this for a job. So that's one problem, is accessibility to your data. The second problem is something I've already mentioned, which is most sellers are not data analysts. Ask if I dump you a bunch of data and say, hey, go make more profitable decisions with this, you're like, what the heck am I supposed to do with this? And you really can't afford to hire a data analyst, even part-time. They're 6 figures all day. Okay. But we do have large language models. What if you had something you could ask your questions to? Because the thing about it is sellers have good questions. They just don't know how to answer them. So what if we did have something where you could ask your questions and get a direct answer?
Yeah, that's good. I just did a call for Johnny as like an Amazon group, and the thing for the call was I was going to give all of my ASINs I'd ever sold on Amazon for Q4s to these things, and I was like, guys, don't try to go through this and manually line by line it. Put it in the cloud, put it into ChatGPT,
Yeah.
and try to find patterns that way. Now I don't know if anyone did that, but you're kind of speaking on the same type of thing, right? Because before I wouldn't even have known that, but I've been getting a Facebook ad so I can put ad data and catch like crazy trends that would take me hours to realize myself. I think that is huge. The more data you can put in and sort this data better than you can sort it yourself, I think that is kind of the future of that stuff.
Well, and there's another thing here that's very interesting. In computer programming, you have something, push versus pull. Some data you want to push it out, other days you want to pull it only when you need it. Most of what we have, if not all of what we have right now, is pull. You have to go and request that. You have to ask the question. But what if you don't even know the question to ask? Because language is an interesting thing, right? I read a tweet on this today, and I can't remember the exact of it, but basically, like, language limits our reality is the concept. So if you go into a new industry and you don't even know the terms, you cannot actually ask questions because the terms don't even exist in your brain. So for newer sellers who are getting into this, you might hear terms and be like, oh, let me go look into inventory management and things of that nature. What about things you've never heard of? You can't even ask the question. You don't even know it exists. So what if we had something that could push answers to you to questions you didn't even think about? And I mean, this is where my mind goes, right? Like, why do I, as the human, have to pull the things? Like, if you notice an anomaly on something that anomaly means something bad, just tell me, and then I can be like, oh, cool, I actually don't care about that. That's irrelevant. Or, wow, I didn't think about that. Let me double click. Let me go deeper onto that, right? And I mean, listen, if your storage fees are increasing and they increased 30% last month, did you notice? Did you ask the question? Right? Or could something just email you and be like, hey, by the way, this occurred. You should look into it. And oh, by the way, here's the products where 90% of that cost came from. You get what I'm saying? Like, how do you take a non-data analyst person, a non-tech savvy person, and give them that level of technical leverage? That's the world we're going to. And I don't think enough people, especially on the seller front, are thinking about this. This sounds so pie in the sky and 5 years away. It's not. We can do this stuff now.
Yep.
That's the crazy part too. Like, I think you're right. A lot of people don't know the questions to actually ask. Like, for example, like you're saying, like, no one's getting an email because Amazon's not going to email, like, hey,
right.
Your storage, like, yeah, we don't care about that. But like, there's also other questions too, where it's like, sometimes it looks like you're out of stock, but your stuff's really an FC transfer. And like, to figure that out is like a 20-30 minute thing times 100 ASINs or whatever.
Yeah.
There's really no good situation where it's just like, that'd be great if it's like, hey, what inventory should I buy? Should I buy more of this? Or like, well, maybe, but there's like 30 units still in transfer or sitting in a warehouse or lost in a warehouse. And then you avoid ordering the 30 units and you're just like, okay, I'm gonna put my capital elsewhere.
Right. Well, think about this. OpenAI, we'll switch to AI here for a bit. OpenAI came out with 5 levels of AI. Level 1 is basically what we had, chat, right? You could just have a conversation back and forth with a large language model. Level 2 is human level reasoners. We just got this a few weeks ago with the O1 model. It actually will think before giving it an answer. Doesn't sound like a big deal, but all the benchmarks, these logic reasoning based problems that previous models failed. And I'll give you a good example. If I have a strawberry on a table, I put a glass over top of it, and then I remove the glass and put it into the microwave. Where's the strawberry? Most models, if not all of them, would say it's in the microwave. Well, we know that's not true. O1, one shot, meaning the first time it was asked, said it's on the table. You didn't move it. Okay, that's a big deal. I can reason through things, kind of like humans can. We can scale that out and get it even better. Level 3 is agents. This is the concept that gets me the most excited. The pace at which we will achieve agents is probably the next few months, if not worst case 2025. Agents are interesting because it's not just asking a question and getting an answer. It's solving deeper problems. It's access to your software, to your data, where you can say, hey, I need to do X, Y, and Z, and you have access to my software, go do it. Or, hey, I have $5,000 worth of inventory that I can purchase. Go look at what I need to reorder and then optimize for the highest profitability and then send me a PO basically with that. So the IQ of each of these levels increases. With previous GPT-4, I think we're somewhere around 70, 75 IQ. So it was considered like a smart high school student. O1 is considered a PhD level. And like, yeah, IQ does not scale based on education in the traditional sense, but roll with me here. Why do we hire people? We don't hire people necessarily for their time. We really hire them for access to their brain, to their intelligence, right? Because if we didn't need intelligence for the task, we would use automation like Zapier and Make.com. That's a fact. So the limitation in getting high IQ individuals is cost, it's capital. It costs a lot more to hire an actual software engineer in the United States than it does to hire a programmer overseas, like 3 to 4x more actually. But it's a very different thing. And so as Amazon sellers, every cost you have is now not going towards inventory, which means you're kind of incentivized to not hire people, which is why we all hire VAs for $8 an hour in the Philippines. And yes, can you get people with PhDs in the Philippines all freaking day? But that's not the point. The point is, what would it look like if you had 10 PhD level IQ AI systems that work for you for $1,000 a month, and they had access to all your data and all your tools, and they could just do things for you? We're getting to that world really fast because a lot of what we do, like inventory management, pretty straightforward. But there's a right way to do it and a bad way to do it. Well, humans get sick, humans make mistakes, we get sleepy, we get irritable, we get hungry, we make bad decisions. AI doesn't do that. And so think about this. If we get to a world where you don't hire VAs to help you source, you hire digital assistants to help you source. If I told you to 10x your sourcing efforts, it would be a few clicks with a digital assistant, an AI assistant, versus hiring, training, onboarding a human. So that is already possible. Like the Lego pieces already exist to do that. They just have not been assembled in the right way yet. That will change. All of your agents, I mean, think about this. Listing optimization. Resellers don't do this. Why? Because it's time consuming. And if I don't want to do it, I got to hire a VA, which means it's capital intensive. And if I'm only going to be on a listing for 2 weeks, what do I care? Sure. But if you had an AI agent that got a notification every time you jumped on a listing, and it could 80% optimize every listing you jumped on passively, you're not in the loop and it costs you $50 a month to do it, you'd probably want to do that because that could be an extra 10% in sales with no effort on your part and for $50. Now imagine if at scale you did this with 10% of the entire Amazon catalog. What does that look like? So not only is it that this stuff is here, it's the fact that you're getting access to intelligence that is exponentially getting better and exponentially decreasing in cost. So the sellers that struggle to compete because they come in with little capital or limited knowledge on a lot of things, that starts to change. I mean, look at Perplexity is a good example. This is a tool I use daily. How do you answer questions you have when you're trying to learn something? You Google it, you click through 30 something links and try to find the answer and you never find it. Perplexity, you ask that same question and it goes, great. I'll go figure out the right search queries to use. I might use 3, might use 1, doesn't matter. I'll find the answer, tell you the answer, and then give you a reference to where I found the answer. So even that alone, how fast can you gain new knowledge as a seller? Can you solve problems as a seller? Things that, again, back in my day, I'm going to sound old too at this point, 10 years ago, would have taken me a week to figure out. It might take me 30 minutes now. And there are sellers who are not doing this. And so I just yesterday actually published a blog post called the era of the exponential seller. And I'm talking about this, where it's like, listen, there will be a subset of sellers that lean heavy into technology, especially AI, and they will outcompete everyone. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't also do the same. Everybody has the same level of access here. But it's a shift in mindset. It's understanding that not only is Amazon changing, the entire world is changing, and it is changing exponentially. We cannot forecast what the next 6 months will look like, because we got O1, the latest AI model, I think like 2 weeks ago. Like, it hasn't even been that long, but it feels like it's been 3 months. Like, humans are really good at what's known as local and linear. Throughout history, we only knew local knowledge, so from our communities, and things didn't rapidly change. They changed linearly. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we're global and exponential. We have access to everyone around the world, and technology is exponentially growing. So 1 equals 2 equals 4 equals 8 equals 16. The rate of pace we're not even used to as a species. So it's hard for us to contend with the idea that this isn't 5, 10 years down the line. This is in the next 3 to 6 months. And so you kind of have to discount your assumptions of when things will be possible by a lot. And even then you're wrong. You know, it's like everybody asked me, what does 2025 look like? I have no idea. I have a general idea of where the technology is going, but what does the world look like with that technology? I have no idea. I can only generalize what I think it will look like for the industry I operate in. But if you can, and you don't have to be cutting edge on this stuff, right? If you're just curious enough and looking at this stuff, and you don't need to understand how it works, but just start to play around with it and try to apply it to your business, you'll start to see the competitive advantages of it. And I think all the Amazon-based agencies will go away. Why? Because they use VAs to get the work done. Again, if you don't need VAs to do the work, you don't need an agency, because you as an individual have access to the technology to do it yourself. I mean, just think about what that means. It allows every Amazon seller to operate like they're 10 plus people, and it just be you.
I think that people need to understand how important this is that you're saying this. I think everybody hears the AI is going to be huge, but like people really don't understand it unless you really mess around with it. And I
Yeah.
can even tell, like, I obviously know way less than you about this stuff. I'm like the GPT-4, you're the O1 model. But but I will say, like, I've never coded anything in my life.
Yeah.
2, 3 months ago, I found a software on Twitter. It was for a different thing that I'm doing. And I thought, this is not like super complex. Let's see if I can code this into ChatGPT, make it spit it out.
Yeah.
Dude, I coded the whole thing on Python, learned how to do it. Now I have a fully working thing where I can do exactly the task I need. This guy was
Yeah.
charging $1,300 for it. And I don't
Yeah.
like, for everybody watching, I don't know how to code. I don't even know how to read code. I just know how to talk to the AI. So
Yeah.
what you're saying, like, it just, even if people hear this, they're like, yeah, it's whatever. It's like, not whatever. This is like going to replace you, and you will not compete if you can't do
Yeah.
this type of stuff. I saw a talk. This is my next question on this. I saw a guy talk about, we're not as far away as people think of, like, having an agent that you say, hey, build an app that does this and make 50 videos on TikTok and Instagram, push them out
Yeah.
there. And if it doesn't go viral and I don't hit this much
Yeah.
revenue, restart
Eric
and make
Schmidt. Yeah.
is that how real? Because to me, that's like really getting into like some complex stuff there. Do you think that's even realistic at all? Or how it's going to be realistic? How far away is it till we can just like basically create humans that are creative and can just
Yeah.
solve problems?
So there's 2 levels there. The bottom level is the create the TikTok video.
Mhm.
You can do that with AI now. I've cloned my voice with 11 Labs. I've cloned videos of me with HeyGen.
Yep.
You can also just create AI models, basically, just, create it from scratch. So the creation of the content, yes, you could do that today. The creation of the web app, depending on, this is where people get kind of annoyed on the engineering front, because Cursor is a development environment that you write code in, but it's hooked up to AI. So instead of going to ChatGPT, Claude, and like copy and pasting, it actually understands all your code. It can make multiple files. So like a lot of people are using that and it's awesome. There's also Replit, which has an AI agent that can actually create like full stack software from words. The issue is, and this will change, but like, can you build a rudimentary software full stack? Yes. And by full stack, I mean like the front end visually, what that looks like, and then the back end, like databases and all that stuff. Yes. Can you build it to scale to millions of people? Not really. Like that's where you need actual software engineers. But again, you may not need that, right? You might be like, I just want this one kind of functionality and build it yourself. Yes. Now, so that's like the bottom layer. The layer we're talking about is agents, where you say, I want to do this, and it goes, great, I'm gonna go do that, do this, build that. We're not there yet. That is that third level that we're just not there. But again, this is exponentially evolving. So the rate at which, like now that we've hit level 2, we'll hit level 3 faster, and then in theory hit level 4 faster than we hit level 3, and so on and so forth. And the 5th level is where it tops out in their model, which is like organizations. So level 4 is innovators. So like they're actually creating like innovative, cool ideas. This is really helpful for science, things of that nature. Level 5 is whole organizations. What happens when you have a AI agent that is your CFO, that is your CMO, that is your COO, that is your inventory manager? Like those things will come. And that could be 2 to 3 years out, could be 1 year. I mean, as far as we know, but that's where we're getting to. And that's the promise of AI agents is, I want to get this done. Here's the criteria. Ask me a few questions about anything that's unclear to you. Really define the scope. Great. Strategy makes sense. Go do the execution. And this is kind of what we do as founders, right? Like in the early days, it's way more, it's like 90% execution, 10% strategy, because you have no idea what you're doing. As time goes on, that transfers. It becomes more on the strategy side and less on the execution side. Why? Because you're using technology. You've hired team members to work on each individual type of execution and roles. I think we get to a certain place where as a species, we make that transition where I don't want to, like, if I need to get my haircut, I don't want to call or text or book a link. I just want to say, I want a haircut and I want to do it this week, and it understand, when am I available? When do I like to do it? It has my preferences. Or booking flights. I loathe booking flights and I can't tell you why. Love flying, love traveling, hate booking flights. But I have my criteria. I always want to sit on the window because I never get up, and I hate getting up for people who have to use the bathroom. And I want to be like kind of towards the front. Okay, cool. I just want to tell you, I want to go from here to here. You have preferences of when I like to take off and land and my seat arrangements, and just go do it. And me say, hey, don't spend more than $500 on this. Great. Add it to my calendar too. So that's where we get to, right? Like right now, we as humans are really manipulating data, clicking buttons, dragging things, whatever. And what if you didn't have to do that anymore? You know what you want the outcome to be, but it's still up to you as the human to execute the steps to make that outcome possible and true. But what if you didn't need that middle part? And this is where we get a little sci-fi, but it's not outlandish anymore. It's just not. And there are plenty of examples. Multion is working on this, little early. There's still a lot of problems with it because we're just not there yet. But what's interesting is people are making AI agents from regular models. And I think what we're trying to get to is the model is the agent, which is a whole different paradigm. But this is why it's important as a seller, just as a human, to just be curious about these things and just in a way kind of daydream and then check yourself. Like, is that in the realm of possibility? Is that something I should be aware of? Because if the entire environment of or the definition of being an Amazon seller is vastly different in 3 to 6 months than it is today, you as a business owner need to be aware of that so you can get ahead of it. And I say all these things as a positive. I'm optimistic as I can be about this stuff. Will it create some problems and have some transitionary issues? Of course, but I don't really subscribe to the whole, AI replacing humans. I really like the model of humans using AI replacing humans. And I think that's where we get to. It's like you augmented. You know what I mean? Like it's not, and yeah, it can definitely handle some things without you in the loop, but you're still the orchestrator. You're still the manager. You're still dictating what gets done and how. It's just doing the actual execution itself.
Well, I want to know your thoughts on this because this is
Yeah.
something that I'd heard someone talk about that was pretty negative about AI that, and I don't really love the whole like what you were just saying that people just
Yeah.
doom and gloom about it, but I do see some negatives and I'm wondering what you think here. I hear that somebody talks about, the absolute truth. Like that there is an absolute truth of some things,
Hmm.
but a lot of times the truth is not black and white. But what AI
Yeah.
does is it does create a black and white truth of like, if I wanted to go make an app or whatever, make me the
Yeah.
best colors. Well, what are the best colors? Where are you getting the
Sure.
data from? Where back in the day, I'm sure you went through this like making Aura. Okay,
Yeah.
what color do we make this thing? You probably searched every forum, every Google page, and then you came to your own conclusion, not an absolute truth, just a subjective truth. Maybe if it was a different
Yeah.
color, you never know.
Yeah.
That's kind of the part where I see is like a bit of an issue where it's like we don't know the truth. We don't even know what the truth is, but it tells
Sure.
us what the absolute truth is, which I think can be a bit of an issue in multiple scenarios. But I don't know, what do you
I
thought? What
don't
do you think there?
I don't think it's any different than what humans do. How do we define truth, right? There's objective truth and subjective truth.
Mhm.
If there's data, we should use objective truth, and we may still go away with it, right? There's color theory, and I could say, blue means trustworthy,
Mhm.
but that's not on brand for us, so we're not going to use blue. um, this is where like subjective truth is very interesting, and I hate to even call it subjective truth because it's really just subjective, right?
Yeah.
That just means opinion. Um, but this is what's cool about AI. It can ask you those questions, or you could change it. It could be like, hey, I looked at it. Blue means trustworthy. I think that makes a lot of sense. And you can come back and be like, well, that is true, but our brand is more so like futuristic and modern and kind of minimal. It goes, oh, okay, I get that context now. I'll go make some changes.
Mhm.
Right. And so I think this highlights the importance of asking good questions and providing good context, this is just a good philosophy as a human. If I say, hey, go get me some food, you go, what kind of food do you want? How much should I spend? Right? You naturally have these questions. Now, if I'm saying that to my wife or my wife's telling me that, I know her preferences. I know the context. I know she likes one thing over the other and has certain, food allergies or whatever. But an AI could gain that context too. And this is what's interesting is as you're interacting with certain AIs, they're building its knowledge on you. It starts to understand you. So when you say, add some color, it could be very different than when I say add some color. And think about that, right? And you're really looking at two paradigms. You're looking at context and you're looking at intelligence. Well, you could be hyper intelligent, have zero context, and sound like a dummy, right? Or you could have a ton of context and have zero intelligence and still be a dummy. But AI allows us to have best of both worlds there. And this is what I was talking about previously of like, what if you had an AI that understood your data? That's context. What if it understood the patterns and you're like having a conversation, brainstorming, like, I want to go into this category. I think it makes a lot of sense. And you forgot the context, and your AI is like, yeah, I hear you, but we've been through this before. And here's the data that shows that's a horrible idea for you because the returns are so high. So it looks nice, but it's actually horrible for you. Oh, good point. Right? Like we're getting to that level of having a discord with software. And I do this now. I use an app called Dot. It's like kind of like a journal. And it's an AI journal. I'm just having conversations. And what's interesting is the first thing that blew me away where it remembered so much about me. Where if I'm having a rough day, I'm like, man, I'm really just struggling with this. It'll be like, hey, you I've noticed the pattern where you tend to struggle with that kind of a thing. Let's talk about that. I'm like, oh, I guess that is a pattern. Or um it knows that I love James Bond and Sherlock Holmes and Star Trek. And if I'm like, man, I'm having a really rough day, I need to decompress, it'll be like, hey, like, why don't you watch like an old Brosnan version of Bond? I'm like, dang, it made a joke because I was joking about watching Austin Powers and relaxing, and I was like, oh, I need to get to the cats for my cats or whatever. And it made a joke that I didn't trigger. It was just like something about like, are you purry baby? And I was just like, was that an Austin Powers joke? And it's like, yeah. Like, dude, I haven't talked about Austin Powers in like a month, but it remembered that. And like, that's cool on the personal front, but apply that to the business front. If it understands all your emails, all your data, that's insane. That's a superpower, in my opinion.
Yep. This has been so good talking about this stuff, man. I never get to talk to anybody that knows like more than me about it. So this has been blowing my mind talking about this. This is awesome. And one
Yeah.
quick thing, do you have, let's say, to leave with people with something too. You
Yeah.
have like 3 to 5 like AI apps, and not Amazon related. I mean, you can
Totally.
throw those in if you want, but just
Yeah.
pure like personal stuff or business stuff too. You know, anything
Yeah.
like what you just said that you like really, really recommend.
Yeah, Perplexity is my go-to for everyone. It's free. They have a pro version. Free's just as good. Perplexity.com, I believe. That replaces Google and searching, and that's amazing. For scheduling, like I have a lot of meetings, so I have to schedule a lot, you know, where other people might use cal.com or Calendly links. I use something called Howie.ai. So it's hooked up to my calendar. I basically CC Howie on an email, send it out. I'm just like, hey, find me a time this week to meet with this person. It reads the entire email thread and goes, oh, okay, you want to talk about this thing? That's the context. And Dylan's available on Tuesday and Wednesdays at these times. What do you want to do? So it responds to the email. You would respond back, hey, Tuesday at 3 p.m. sounds great. It'd say, awesome, add it to my calendar, Zoom link, everything. So I'm like out of the loop the moment I hit enter after CCing Howie. And if the person's like, hey, sorry, I need to reschedule, it just takes care of everything for me. That's like $15 a month too. Super cheap. And if you do a lot of calls, granola.ai, I think they just changed it to AI. It's kind of like Fireflies if you're used to that, where like a bot joins the call and records everything. But what's cool about this is a bot doesn't record the call or doesn't join the call. It records directly like your computer audio, and you can take your chicken scratch in the notes section. And the moment it's done, you said, great, generate notes, and it will fill everything out for you, which is awesome. You can ask it questions too. That's been phenomenal. I think, you know, ChatGPT is awesome for a brainstorming session. I don't really use it as often. But if I'm just like trying to brainstorm stuff, get some ideas rolling, that's pretty good. What else here? I have a laundry list. I gotta think here. That's like the major stuff. You know, you mentioned at the beginning of the call doing like data analyst kind of stuff. Julius.ai is pretty good for that. I find ChatGPT and Claude struggle on that front. Julius AI is really good. Their whole thing is like basically a data analyst AI. So if you're wanting to start to experiment with that kind of stuff and see what's possible, answer some deep questions, that's probably a good starting point for a lot of people.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm into all of them. I'm trying like new ones all the time, and I
Oh, for sure.
feel like some of them are like helpful. What I would really like, I saw someone have a GoFundMe project, and it was like something you
Mhm.
carried around, which this does seem dystopian probably for some
Friend.
people, but you carry around like a little stick, you talk to it. At the end of the day, it summarizes everything that you've heard
Oh,
and that you talk to, and it's like
yeah.
got this like knowledge base, and it's only like 130
Mhm.
bucks, but it's like early
Yeah.
stages. To me, I just like have so many ideas. I'm kind of like ADHD a bit, so always
Yeah.
talking about stuff. If I could have be like, dude, you said a bunch of dumb stuff, but these things are really good throughout the day. That would be
Yeah.
really helpful. And I don't know if it has
Um,
the memory capability yet of doing that, like at a large
right.
scale, from my understanding, but maybe
Mhm.
I'm wrong about that.
There are there's this concept of like companion AIs that people are creating. It's kind of like more passive, which is nice. One is limitless.ai and another one's friend.com. And so it's like a pendant or like a little clip, and it basically just records all the audio and then stores that information. I want that because I want to be able to like have this discussion, be like, oh yeah, I'm going to do X, Y for you guys and not have to add it to my task list. I want it to be like, those are 2 tasks. I'm going to add it to things for you. They don't have that, unfortunately, but it will like grab everything, which is cool. There's one, I think it was called Hopper. They're in beta, I tested, but basically it would sit in on these calls and take the transcriptions and then add tasks. So if I said, I will do X, Y, and Z for you, it will create those 3 tasks for me to do in their account. But I don't think it's a great task manager, which is why I don't use it. I like things and Todoist. But yeah, some of these things, what you know, they do one thing really well, but they don't really integrate with other things in the way you kind of organically work. And so that creates some friction for a lot of this stuff. But um, very excited. And if you haven't, I have the Rabbit R1, which is kind of cool. I pre-ordered that. It's dead right now, but it's more of a gimmick. Like you get to talk to AI, and I kind of give it to my son, just ask stupid questions. But it was cool. It's a beautiful piece of hardware. It's actually amazing. Um, so yeah, I play around with everything, even some of the coding stuff, just to kind of see what's possible. Because I think for me, I want to understand what is possible for engineers that is not possible for the average person, but will be in the next 3 to 6 months. because I want to be ahead of the curve, so to speak.
Yeah. What's crazy to me is like, I remember when I was the kid, I just turned 26, but even when I was like 18, 17, it was like,
Yeah.
get a computer science, be a computer engineer, and you're basically good for life. And it's like, oh my gosh, man, like a few
Yeah.
years later, it's like that whole industry is probably going to be one of the first ones out, the whole coding thing, which the big
Yeah.
problem is going to be fixing the little problems, which is kind of what you alluded to earlier. I think
Yeah.
it's like, I could build Go Aura maybe one day in 3 years, but I can't fix these
Mhm.
individual problems. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that's going to be the thing. Now, like you said, it's all exponential, so maybe that's solved pretty quickly. But that's
Yeah.
like,
They're
man,
trying.
imagine people that went into that thinking I've got 150 grand a year plus a job
Hmm.
for life, and now I'm just replaced by a computer, which is like the irony of that
Yeah.
is crazy. But yeah,
Yeah.
that blows my mind away.
What's nice about it so far is it's helping regular engineers become what's called 10x engineers. Like they could just move faster, understand things better. Again, I think the near term is more augmentation. You're as the human using it getting better. It's not necessarily replacing you, but this has happened over time. Everything gets
Everything. Yeah.
replaced. Technology, like we don't have drivers anymore. Like my car, I have FSD on my Tesla, and like my car just drives me now. You know what I mean? Like, and like, I think the robo taxi is getting released in 2 days. The model from Tesla, like a actual car designed just for robo taxi. But again, if you understand how things are changing, you have a better sense of what you need to do about that. And there's been some theorizing about like what should kids study in college, and Sam Altman has said it's less about becoming a specialist in any one thing and being more of a good generalist in the long-term future of things. That's still not true. Like AI couldn't build Aura. It's
Yeah.
way too complicated. Now, could our team be more efficient at building things using Aura? Yeah, or using AI? Yes, 1,000%. But even us, we're a small team, 6 people, and pulling off what we pull off with the team size we have. A lot of our competitors explicitly tell everyone that we outsource everything and we don't have a single VA in the company. Like it's crazy. I mean, we've had competitor, like the head of customer success at competitors apply to work for us as a CS rep. And they're bragging like, oh, we got 4 people. I'm like, cool. How big's your, the user base? And like 400 people. It's like I have one person for many, many thousands of people. We automatically process and successfully handle about 70 to 80% of our support requests.
Wow.
So like you can do this stuff.
Oh,
Yep. That's awesome, man. John, what else do you have here? This
I
has
don't
been an
know.
AI. I
Yeah, we've
love
covered
this,
so much.
man.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, what advice do you have for people, I guess, maybe Amazon sellers? Like you kind of
Yeah.
alluded to it before, like, and Drew asked you about the apps. Like what could,
Mhm.
let's just say an online arbitrage person,
Yeah.
how could they use AI or what could they be
Mhm.
doing to be more efficient?
Yeah, a few different things. You could already use something like Julius or ChatGPT to give it some data and ask questions to help you make better decisions. I think that's a good thing to do. It's hard right now because I think there's a big gap between the tech that is possible and what's being built for Amazon sellers. This is a big gripe I have. I don't think there's enough tech dorks like us in the Amazon space that are like, let's push the envelope and apply that stuff here. But it will come. I think my biggest piece of advice is to be curious and see what is technically possible that is not being applied in our use case. Because if it's technically possible, it's very likely that it will be applied to our use case. So like the AI agent sourcing stuff is technically possible. I built a very, very rudimentary version of this and it found one profitable OA lead, but it took like 8 hours, like it's crazy. But again, I'm not a software engineer. So I think those things will come. I think start to hoard data. Data's fuel for AI all day. And just be on the lookout. There are a lot of startups that are building things that are not geared towards sellers, but would work for sellers. Like you're just not the target audience. But if you just say, well, it's built to solve problem A, but problem A is kind of problem B for me, it's basically the same thing. I'll just use it for that. I think that's coming. Like Smart Scout. I mentioned listing optimization, the passive stuff. Smart Scout came out with a non-passive version, so you just jump in, click a few buttons, and it's like, cool, got you. So like it's starting to come. We're just not at a point where we have specific tools for Amazon sellers, but it will come. This is something we're actively working on ourselves and hoping others do as well. Like we want more here. But like if you look at sourcing software, why can't that be an agent? You know what I mean? Why can't TA be an agent? So we'll get there.
Dude, I love it. Any closing thoughts? Or actually, I have one more thing. You'd see if I'm right on that spot. But I tell all the people I know in person, if they don't have a super high skill set or anything, like that you just kind of going about things, that you need to learn how to work with the AI, like learn the like technical stuff, or learn how to work on it hardware wise, which is unlikely, but I think that's where the future is kind of moving. So I like that you got on here and talked about that stuff, because I do think we're going to look in a few years and be blown away by, like, if you don't know how to use it, you don't know how to fix it, you're going to have a tough place like fitting into things efficiently, like, because the people that are just going to be so much farther ahead.
Yeah, my wife and I was talking about this last night, because just like my parents struggle with technology because they were not born into it, they had to adopt it later in life, and we were born with it. I'm like, I can kind of do whatever. My son will probably have a similar thing with AI at a greater level than I will. Granted, I'm curious and like deep into this stuff, but she was arguing that the average person is not. And I think that's a very good point. But I think you can decide to be, right. And I think if you're just curious and just honestly, it's play. That's all it is. If you play around with it and you kind of test the limits and figure out what it can and can't do, that then gives you a basis to say, well, I have something similar to that. I wonder if it could help me solve this one problem. And maybe it can, maybe it can't, right? Or is there a tool that solves this problem for me that I have, right? Like I'm a big fan of writing a list of all your frustrations, all the things that annoy you, and then go and try to find a solution for it. Sometimes it's buying a product. Sometimes it's finding a software. Like the meeting thing was annoying to me. So I was like, I just looked and found Howie. Email was annoying to me. So I looked and found Superhuman. So there's plenty of solutions that I'm not even aware of, certainly. But it's kind of on you as the individual to figure out what are your problems and how could AI solve it? Is there a tool off the shelf you can use, or is it just chatting with ChatGPT? That's fine too. But yeah, it's going to be a very interesting. I think it's going to be a tough transition for a lot of people. I think the end outcome is going to be amazing that we can't even fathom, but the transition to that is going to be difficult for a lot of people. This is why I harp on it so much, is like, it doesn't have to be, you know what I mean? If you just kind of say, oh, that's that kind of nerdy tech stuff, I don't care, you're in a bad position. But again, you don't have to be a software engineer to get this stuff. You don't even have to understand how it works. That's the cool part. You just have to get comfortable using it. And the cool thing is using it as texting, basically. Yeah, right. It's not like pulling a bunch of levers. It's literally just being like, hey, what do you think of this? Or, hey, I'm dealing with this problem. Give me some ideas for it. Like, use it to start as a brainstorming session. And then that will kind of be the bridge into what is this prompt engineering stuff? Well, prompt engineering sounds kind of advanced, but actually it's just writing better things to get better results. That's all it is. And you can steal other people's prompts because they share them everywhere. So like, you don't have to go to the deep end. Dip a toe in first, and then go a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper. And then you find more than the average person does. And that's important.
100%. John, you want to close this out?
Yeah. Thanks so much for being here. Where can everyone find you, Dylan?
Yeah, so goaura.com, so GOAURA.com. We do have early stage program for sellers doing less than 10 grand a month. So we basically knock down the price from 97 to 27. You still get access to Maven, Hyperdrive, all that cool stuff. It's just goaura.com/early-stage to apply there. Just need to be doing less than 10K a month on average, and you're golden there. And then on Twitter, I'm pretty active. So I think it's just at Dylan_Carter, just DILLON_Carter. That's pretty much it. Yeah, we write every week on some cool stuff at goaura.com/blog. That's pretty much it.
Sweet. Well, thanks so much for doing this, and go check out Goaura, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Peace.